Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. And just a reminder, this is Grogu, not me. I'm just merely his translator into English. So if you accidentally take his financial advice as financial advice, sue him, not me. With that out of the way, let's get to today's video. So instead of our usual technical analysis, I want to talk about something a bit different today. In order to be the best trader you can be, I truly believe it's important for you to understand all aspects of the market, which is why today I want to talk about economics, specifically macroeconomics. This seems to be one area which traders don't seem to know much about. So I want to take the time and make this into a long series in order to educate you on this. But what is macroeconomics? Macroeconomics is a study of the economy as a whole. Typically, we define a whole as one nation. So, for example, we can study the United States economy, Russia's economy, China's economy, and all of this is classified as macroeconomics. For the rest of the video, I want to go over the three most important macroeconomic statistics: GDP, CPI, and the PCE. Future videos of this series will become more advanced and will be more connected to trading. For right now, I just want to make sure that we have a strong foundation to move forward. So let's start with the GDP. GDP actually has two different definitions. GDP is the total expenditure on domestically produced final goods and services in a single year, or the total income earned from factors of production in a single year. These two definitions are actually equal to each other because every dollar spent on a good is then received as income. This is more visually explained by the circular flow model. As you can see from the bottom side of the circle, the value of the goods from firms purchased equals the amount spent from households. And at the top of the circle, the amount of income households receive equals the value of the labor firms receive. Of course, this is just theory. We assume there's no inefficiencies in this model, or as economists put it, leakage, and we'll get to models which account for this later on. Now, how do we calculate GDP? GDP is calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, using the expenditure part of the circular flow model, simply because it's the easiest. The BLS uses this equation to calculate GDP. Y, which represents GDP in this case, equals C for consumption, plus I for investment, plus G plus government expenditure, plus net exports, which is equal to exports minus imports. So we have a way of calculating the value of all final goods and services produced domestically in a given year. So now that we calculated output, let's take a look at how we calculate another very important economic metric, inflation. To estimate inflation using GDP, we must define the two different types of GDP, nominal GDP and real GDP. Nominal GDP is a GDP given in the current year's prices and is not adjusted for inflation, while the real GDP is the GDP in terms of a base year's prices, and that is adjusted for inflation. For example, let's say a country has only produced 10 apples in a given year. This year, apples cost $4 each. So the nominal GDP would be the 10 apples times the $4 each, which is equal to $40. So the nominal GDP for your country would be $40. But let's take a base year of 2012, and in 2012, the price of apples were $2 each. So the real GDP would be the 10 apples times the $2 each would equal $20. So the real GDP would be $20. With nominal GDP and real GDP defined, we can come up with an equation to calculate the percent change of price between the current year and the base year. Economists call this the GDP deflator, and is given by this equation. Nominal GDP over real GDP times 100. This allows us to see the percent change of all the final goods and services produced between now and the base year. Now let's talk about the Consumer Price Index, also known as the CPI. The CPI is a measurement of the overall level of prices by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, also known as the BLS. It is used to track the changes of price of typical household items. The BLS calculates the CPI by gathering prices of typical household items every single month, and the breakdown of these prices currently like this. They then take these prices and compare these prices back to a certain base period. This equation looks like this. Although the CPI looks like a good indicator for inflation, this is not actually the main measurement used for inflation. As of 2012, the Federal Reserve announced that it will be using the PCE Deflator as its main gauge for inflation. Just like the CPI, the PCE Deflator is measured every single month and is used to measure the overall level of prices. So why does the Federal Reserve prefer the PCE deflator? That's because the PCE is broken down into certain categories of goods, such as goods, durable goods, non-durable goods, and services. The CPI is often criticized for only accounting for households in urban settings. Due to this wider variety of goods and services, the PCE deflator is much less volatile than the CPI. The PCE Deflator is also weighted by data acquired from business surveys rather than the CPI's consumer surveys, which is typically more reliable. But there are some distinct problems with the PCE Deflator. It takes the GDP into account in its formula, which only is recorded once per quarter. However, the BEA takes retail sales to account for this. However, there's still some marginal error in this calculation. So what does this mean for us who are trying to navigate the financial market? Well, if we're trying to estimate the Fed's reaction to inflation and consequently the monetary policy that follows, it seems that we should follow the PCE deflator, not the CPI, as the Fed uses this metric. Funnily enough, the media loves to push the CPI data in its headlines as it is more volatile and will give more extreme reads. But I've yet to read one Market Watch article that mentions the PCE deflator. With all of that being said, I hope you learned something new today and something useful, and we'll cover more advanced stuff later on in the series. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great day.